Welcome. My name is Lynn McManus, and I'll be the moderator for this Engineers Without Borders webinar, How to Present to the TAC. This presentation is one of the core programs in the expanding series of online, on-demand continuing education programs created by Engineers Without Borders USA and presented by Contract Solutions Group. Before I turn the program over to our presenter, I'd like to make a couple of announcements regarding the program. As our program begins, you'll notice that the program itself will fill the majority of your computer screen. On the lower left of your screen, you'll see a Pause Play button. If for any reason you need to pause the presentation, click once on the pause button. To restart the program, simply click on the play arrow that will appear in the same place. If you should need technical assistance, please click on the email link for Client Services at Contract Solutions Group located on our website pages. Or you may call us for assistance from 7 a.m. Pacific Time until 4:30 p.m. Pacific Time, Monday through Fridays. If you're disconnected from the webinar due to local internet issues, simply log back in through the Engineers Without Borders website and restart the program. After the program, you'll be taken directly to the attendance reporting page. It is very important that you complete this short form and submit it immediately upon completion of the program to receive full credit for your participation in the program. If this step is bypassed, neither you nor your chapter will receive credit. Now it's my pleasure to introduce our presenter for the program, Peter Waugh. Peter earned his B.S. and M.S. in Civil Engineering at the University of Colorado in Boulder and has a total of 25 years' experience working in water resources, structural engineering, and roadway engineering. He has been a project manager at the EWB-USA National Office since January 2008. Peter served in the Republic of Seychelles as a Peace Corps volunteer and has worked on EWB-USA projects in Mexico and Guatemala. He's a licensed professional engineer in the state of Colorado. Peter, I'll turn the program over to you.
Thank you for that introduction, Lynn. And thank you to the chapters who have elected to look at this webinar, How to Present to the Technical Advisory Committee. I'm assuming that since you have chosen to view this webinar, you're getting close to the point where you will be presenting to the TAC. And you know, one thing to keep in mind as you're preparing your presentation and presenting and listening to the suggestions of the Technical Advisory Committee is not specifically the vision and the mission, but you should remember that you as chapter members working on a specific project, you've got the same mission and vision as the Technical Advisory Committee. They're trying to do the same thing that you are. And so I think a lot of chapters feel a lot of kind of anxiety about going in front of the Technical Advisory Committee and think, oh, this is going to be kind of an adversarial thing. It really doesn't have to be at all, because really what you're doing and what the TAC is doing, you're both trying to get to the same thing, and that's to fulfill our vision and mission. And so let me just go over briefly our program quality process, just so, because the TAC is an integral part of this. And so this is just a little bit of background. So our project process has been designed for one purpose, really, and that's to maximize the likelihood that projects that are implemented by EWB-USA are high quality, they're sustainable, and they're successful. And the Technical Advisory Committee plays an essential role in that process. And as you all know, the only time the Technical Advisory Committee comes into play for a chapter is at the pre-implementation stage. So for everything else, you just discuss the documentation and the trip or your design, you do all that just with the project manager here at the EWB-USA National Office. But for the pre-implementation trip, that's when you discuss it with the full Technical Advisory Committee. And so who is in the Technical Advisory Committee? Well, basically, first of all, there's not just one of them. We have one for each of our regions. So there are 5 Technical Advisory Committees, and each one is comprised by a group of highly experienced engineers and other professionals that will review your proposed project implementation. So these, usually, whatever project you're presenting, there's a number of people on the TAC who have some experience in that, and there's probably 1 or 2 that have extensive, detailed experience doing exactly that type of work. And they're going to be reviewing it and helping you come up with an even better project than you have already proposed. And so each regional TAC has representatives with project experience with the EWB-USA or other similar organizations. And so what is the role of the TAC? In a nutshell, the TAC is trying to determine if your chapter has met the 2 fundamental canons of the American Society of Civil Engineers Code of Ethics. So number 1, engineers shall hold paramount the safety, health, and welfare of the public and shall strive to comply with the principles of sustainable development in the performance of their professional duties. So, I mean, basically, the TAC has to decide, have you as a chapter done the requisite engineering so that the health, safety, and welfare of the community, your partner community, is going to be protected? If the answer is no, you're not going to be approved. If you haven't given the TAC enough information to make that decision, you're also not going to be approved. But then secondly, they're also going to see, whether you comply with the second canon of the Code of Ethics, which is engineers shall perform services only in areas of their competence. So students may be thinking, wait a minute, we don't have any competence yet, which is right because you're just students. But the way we take care of that is that your mentor should have that competence, and they're the ones who are directing the project and ultimately are responsible for the project. So students do a lot of the work and all, but they're always being led by a mentor. So this is what the TAC is trying to do, and the question is, so the goal of the TAC, ensure the safety of our volunteers and counterparts. So that is done through the health and safety plan review. Ensure the quality of projects being implemented. The project is technically sound, the chapter knows how to construct the project, and the chapter is aware of the health and safety risks. So, so basically, they want to know that it's a good project, it's technically sound. Number 2, they want to know that, so if you've convinced them that you know how it should be designed, that's great. Secondly, that you have to convince them that you know how to build the thing. And thirdly, you have to convince them not only do you know how it should be designed, we know how to build it, but you're also aware of the health and safety risks, and you've done all you can to mitigate those risks. And then lastly, here, they're making sure that the EWB-USA brand name is being protected. And, that involves lots of things, including what we just listed above about technically sound projects, et cetera, but also that the community is involved and that the program is sustainable. And, a lot of chapters or a lot of chapter members probably haven't really thought, what does the EWB brand name mean? Well, what we hope it means is that whenever anybody within EWB-USA or outside of it thinks about EWB-USA, what first comes to their mind is a quality project. And so what the TAC is doing is protecting that, because if you do a bad project, if someone in some chapter in Florida does a bad project, well, some chapter in Washington State is going to be adversely affected by that. The opposite is also true. If, Central Florida University does a really great job on their program, well, it's going to reflect well on every other EWB-USA program, and every program is going to have it just a little bit easier to do fundraising and things like that. And so the TAC is making sure to protect that brand name. And we also hope it's not, when the TAC tells you this is what we suggest for your project, it's not that they're kind of dictating, you've done something incorrectly, this is how you do it correctly. Really what they're trying to do is just share their advice on a project, because likely they've done this many times before, and if they see you making a mistake, they can help you avert that before you do make the mistake. And then lastly, the TAC makes a decision about implementation of the project. And so how does the TAC do its job? Well, firstly, it reviews the document that your chapter has submitted, the 525 pre-implementation report. Sometimes, if necessary, they'll review other documentation. So if you did, say, a preliminary design report or an alternatives analysis that has a lot of information that's relevant, we'll also give that to the Technical Advisory Committee for them to review. They then listen to the chapter present their project, and they ask questions, and then they make a decision about project implementation. So that's how the TAC does its job. The question is, how can your chapter help the TAC do its job? Really, all you can do is give the TAC enough information to make a decision about the project. You may have been working on this project for 2 years, you've been to the site, twice already, you've done countless hours of design, you've been to 40 project meetings, you've had this project, you've been saturated in it for 2 years, you know everything about it. And that's great, but you've got to somehow give that information to the Technical Advisory Committee. And the only way for you to do that, you have two forums. One is in your 525 pre-implementation report, and the other is in your presentation to the TAC. Because unless you tell it to the TAC, they don't know it. So while you may have all this background, the TAC doesn't know anything about it. So give them enough information for them to make this decision. So what exactly is the TAC meeting? Well, first of all, it's a web-based meeting where between 1 and 3 chapters will present their projects. So if 3 chapters present, there's just kind of one after another. If only one presents, you get a little more time for your presentation. And there likely will be between 5 and 10 TAC members at each meeting. It changes depending on how busy each of the TAC members is. They're all volunteers. They work full-time doing other stuff, and so they're not available to attend every single meeting. So, but it's somewhere between 5 and 10 TAC members will be at the meeting. And so what you will do is log on to the GoToMeeting link on the agenda. You will call into the conference number for the audio, and then you will give a 20-minute long PowerPoint presentation about your project, and that'll be followed by 10 minutes of question and answer. So that's really it. Let me just go back for a second. So you've got 20 minutes to present. You should really kind of hit that pretty much dead on. 10 minutes of question and answer after that. And so this GoToMeeting link, you have to be in a place that has good internet access. You don't want anything else on your computer running other than the GoToMeeting link and your PowerPoint presentation. And then you want a good telephone, preferably a landline, for the audio. And so let me just give you a couple suggestions for your PowerPoint presentation. And each of these is, none of these are hard and fast. This is what you have to put in there. Think through which of these is most appropriate and most important to get across in 20 minutes, which is not a lot of time, but to get across your project. So some kind of background information about the community. At the very least, give the country, region, a brief description of the area, and then also tell us what kind of a project it is. There have been, believe it or not, presentations before where they got through the entire presentation and never once listed the country that they were hoping to implement their water project in. Secondly, either draw or state precisely what is to be implemented. So this is just, like one slide to let the TAC know we are asking specifically for permission to implement this. You'll go into more detail later in your presentation, but for example, the chapter plans to implement a 30-foot long pedestrian bridge over the Rio Vibora in Guatemala, something like that. That tells us this is what you want to do. Or the chapter plans to install a spring box, 2 kilometers of transmission pipeline, a 5,000-gallon storage tank, and 1 kilometer of distribution pipeline for this community. So either state it or draw it out, and this is so the TAC knows what you're asking for permission to implement. If the TAC doesn't know what you're asking for permission to implement, they can't give you permission to do it. Provide just a brief summary information about previous trips to the site. List your in-country partners. And so your in-country partners may be more or less important depending on what kind of project you have. If you have, for example, an NGO that's just providing some minor assistance with a bridge project, you don't have to spend really any time at all on this. If, on the other hand, you have a water treatment project where you're doing individual slow sand filters in every home, and your in-country partner is an NGO that's going to be tasked with doing the education and continuing to assist the community in your absence, well, then we're going to want to know, and the TAC is going to want to know a lot about this in-country partner because they are so important to the success of the program. Provide a brief summary of alternatives that were considered and why the chosen alternative was selected. So before you jump in and say, we're using individual slow sand filters in every home and go into all kinds of detail about that. Just real briefly state that we looked at these other alternative methods and we chose individual slow sand filters for this reason. That's just so the TAC knows that you didn't jump into the first solution you saw without looking at all the available solutions. Provide a summary of design criteria and calculations. In here, you don't have to show us every calculation, but do show, you know, kind of the most basic ones that you would need to use to show the, you know, that the project works. And so let's consider perhaps a water supply project. What you might want to do is show that, you know, we've considered this is the supply, you know, liters per second. This is the demand. Maybe it's liters per day or something like that. And then show any other calculations that are just the real important ones that that were used for the entire design. You'll want to show design drawings. So, for example, if you have a bridge project, you'll want to probably run through just real briefly each of your design drawings. If there's too many of them, show just a couple and keep others in reserve in case of questions. If you have a water project, you're going to want to show a plan and profile of that. You need to show site mapping just to show how this relates to other, your implementation facilities relate to other parts of the community. And again, just show on the site mapping what is appropriate for that project. So if it's a bridge project, what's important is, you know, not individual homes or anything like that, but, you know, perhaps these are the closest town, this is the waterway, this is the approach roadway, and this is where the bridge is going to be placed, something to that effect. You'll want to discuss the construction process, including construction safety. Here, basically, you're just trying to convince the TAC, yes, we know how to build this thing, and we know how to build it safely. You want to discuss sustainability and the long-term operation and maintenance, because, you know, going back to what we've discussed previously, you have to convince the TAC that you know how to build the thing, or you know how it should be, how it should look in its final form. You know how to get there, how to construct it so that the design is implemented properly, and you know how to do that safely, and then you know that in the long term, operation and maintenance, the community can do this, and it can be successful in the long term. So a couple suggestions just for presenting itself. First of all, when you're presenting, have a minimum of 3 persons available. You can have more if you want to, but have a presenter, someone who acts as a backup presenter and a technical assistant, and then lastly, your mentor who's there to answer questions. And always have your mentor or faculty advisor there. In some TACs, they won't even let you present unless they are there. And then practice your presentation. You have 20 minutes to present. Make sure to hit that mark, because if it ends up being a 30-minute presentation, they'll probably cut you off right at, you know, 22, 23 minutes, and you're going to have a number of minutes of presentation that you never got to give to the TAC. So practice and make sure you hit the 20-minute mark. And then log on and be ready to present 10 minutes before your scheduled time. So if it says that you're presenting at 5:10 local time, just right at 5 o'clock, just log on, get on the audio also. And, the audio always asks you to give your name, but don't give your name. When it says, please introduce yourself, just stay quiet. And when it's your turn to present, the facilitator of the meeting will call on you. And so now the details. So you'll receive an agenda the Thursday before the TAC meeting. If you don't receive one, email projects@ewb-usa.org or your project manager. There will likely be other chapters presenting during the same meeting. So if a lot of meetings, there's 3 presenting. So if you're the second one, you'll tune in at 5:40 local time, or that's when you're scheduled to start. So at 5:30, 10 minutes beforehand, you log on, and then just be quiet, and you'll likely hear the question and answer of the chapter before you. So it's a web-based meeting. When it's your turn to present, the facilitator will switch it so that everybody sees your screen, so that you present the PowerPoint presentation from your own computer. It's just that everybody is essentially looking at your screen. And the TAC meeting schedule is on the website. And one important thing to remember is that you may be scheduled for a meeting outside your region. And so you can just look to see the month you're presenting, what days potentially you will present. Make sure to have a good internet connection. Sometimes there's firewall issues, etc. Hopefully that's not an issue, but make sure that your internet connection is good. Don't have anything else running on your computer except the GoToMeeting link and your PowerPoint presentation. And then if you can, use a good landline phone for the audio and be in a quiet place. Otherwise, there's just too much background noise and it's kind of distracting. Keep background noise in your room to a minimum. Sometimes there's, chapters who have 10 people who are in the room when they're doing the presentation. If that's the case, just be absolutely silent when the presenter is giving your PowerPoint presentation. Another thing, don't log in using a Mac. It just doesn't work well with this GoToMeeting software. And then email a copy of your PowerPoint presentation to your project manager. The only reason we have this is worst case situation. Something happens at your computer and you lose your internet connection, whatever. I can still present, or the project manager can still present from their computer. They can go through the slides while you describe them on the audio. That's just worst case scenario. We hope it never comes to that, but that's why we have you email a copy of the PowerPoint. And so this is just a quick look at your agenda. Will look something like this, and up at the top there is the GoToMeeting link. And you'll be receiving this the Thursday before you present. And so so after you're done, this is the TAC decision. You're approved. Well, potentially, if you're approved, that's great. That means you did just a really good job presenting your information to the Technical Advisory Committee. They believe it's in the best interest of the community to implement this project. So good for you, good for your chapter, congratulations. The one thing I would say is remember to read the entire TAC decision, and it may be a page or 2 pages long, because they may have recommendations about your project that you will want to take into account as you implement. Alternatively, your TAC decision may be that your project is on hold. That means that the TAC believes that the project is good in principle, but requires additional information or revisions in order to be approved. So they may think, yeah, that looks good, but they didn't give enough information about A, B, C, or D. We want more information about that before we give approval. That's what they ask for. If that's the case, then your chapter has to respond to the hold comments in order to gain approval. And you put together a formal response, and it will be reviewed by the project manager, or in some rare cases by the entire technical advisory committee, to make sure that you've addressed the TAC's concerns. And then the final possibility for the TAC decision, and this is the bad news, your project is declined, and basically what this means is the technical advisory committee believes that implementing the project is just not in the best interest of the community. One thing I can say is that this happens rarely if the chapter has been communicating regularly with the project manager. It still does occasionally, but it's much more rare. What happens if you're declined is the chapter can work with the project manager to develop the best course action, which, you know, a lot of times is just revise and resubmit the project and, you know, just do a better job presenting the design, or maybe spend more time on the design. Sometimes an additional assessment trip might be needed. But the chapter has to revise the project, resubmit the 525 pre-implementation report, and present to the TAC again. And so, you know, finally, it just comes down to the TAC decision. That is the best judgment of this committee about your project. So it's their best judgment. If the TAC believes your project should be declined, you know, frankly, I know it will be painful. It doesn't happen often, but I know it's painful. But you should be glad that they told you that, because what you planned to do was just not in the best interest of the community, and that's what you're after, that's what the TAC is after, that's what we're all after as EWB-USA. So the TAC decision, it's the best judgment of the TAC. Pay attention to it. So if you have questions about this, go ahead and contact your project manager. Your project manager will probably go over this with you briefly when they review your 525 pre-implementation report with you. But if you have any additional questions, go ahead and contact your project manager. And that's the end of our webinar today, and I will go ahead and send this back to our moderator, Lynn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thanks to our participants for your attention. I want to take this opportunity to once again remind our participants that you must complete and submit your attendance on the following webpage to receive credit for attending this program. This concludes today's program, How to Present to the TAC, brought to you by Engineers Without Borders USA and Contract Solutions Group. Please check our online catalog often for the latest instructional programming from EWB-USA and Contract Solutions Group.